Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we try to take some of the most dense and complex systems analysis out there and turn it into a clear map of what's actually happening in the world around you.
Right.
And today, we're tracing these invisible lines of privatization that have, well, completely reshaped our digital lives.
Yeah.
These are lines that feel kind of arbitrary, but they follow a, frankly, frighteningly precise historical pattern.
We are diving deep into the analysis laid out by William L. Weaver, specifically what he calls the Second Enclosure Movement.
Okay.
And our mission really is to understand how the internet went from being this radical, open, common resource to basically a handful of highly controlled, fenced-off digital factories. And these are owned by just a few corporate landlords.
Okay, so let's unpack that core idea.
Yeah.
Because for years, we've all casually used this term digital public square.
Mm-hmm.
But Weaver's work argues that those squares, they haven't been public for a very long time. They've been systematically fenced off. And we, the users, have been sort of converted from autonomous citizens into, well, dependent digital serfs.
Yeah.
So our goal today is to move past the feeling that, that lingering sense of isolation Weaver talked about in his other work, Silence of the Feed, and get to the structural mechanics, the how. How was the infrastructure itself seized piece by piece?
And what gives this analysis its real weight, its frankly terrifying weight, is this concept of the terrifying isomorphism.
Isomorphism. Okay, what is that?
It's a simple idea, really. It just means two things sharing the exact same underlying form or structure, even if they look completely different on the surface.
Like a blueprint.
Exactly like a blueprint. Weaver is suggesting that the structural mechanism that was used to privatize the English countryside centuries ago, it's being replicated with, astonishing fidelity in the architecture of the internet right now in 2025.
So this isn't just a clever analogy.
No, not at all. It's a blueprint being reused.
And if you've ever, logged onto a platform and just felt like you were creating unpaid content for someone else's bottom line, or if you've noticed that your own connections, your friends, seem less visible unless you pay a fee, then this analysis is, well, it's crucial. We need to understand the path that took us from this state of digital self-reliance, the era where anyone could build their own corner of the web, to this state of extreme managed dependency on just 5 or 6 major companies.
This is the story of how our digital common land just vanished.
So to really feel the weight of what's happening today, we have to start with that original blueprint, the First Enclosure Movement. And this isn't just, dusty history.
No.
This transformation of the English landscape in the 18th and 19th centuries, it fundamentally altered the social and economic DNA of the entire modern world.
And before the enclosures, society was structured around something called the common land. We really need to unpack what this means because its digital equivalent, the open web, is so often misunderstood today.
So what were the commons? They weren't just like empty fields, right?
No, not at all. The commons weren't chaotic or unused. They were absolutely essential. They were shared resources, and they were governed by these long-standing community customs.
So paint a picture for us. What did that actually look like for, the average peasant family day to day?
Okay, so imagine a small village. Most families, they might own a tiny patch of ground they cultivated, but their actual survival, that depended on the common pasture.
The shared space.
The shared space, exactly. This was open grazing land where multiple villagers could take their few cows, their sheep, their geese. And just as critically, there were common woods.
Right, for firewood.
For firewood, which you needed for heat, for cooking.
Yeah.
Or common fields where you could forage for wild foods or maybe grow some small subsistence crops. The commons were, they were a critical safety net, a shared reservoir of resources.
So it created a kind of resilience.
Yeah.
You might not be a wealthy landowner, but you were self-sufficient.
Yes.
You had multiple points of failure protection. If your personal crops failed, you could still fall back on the commons. You weren't just reliant on a single wage from a single boss.
Precisely. This was the ultimate decentralized economy. Your livelihood wasn't handed down to you. It was actively woven into the fabric of the community's shared land. The identity was one of, interdependence and self-reliance, not dependency.
And then came the radical shift, the parliamentary fiat, as he calls it.
That's right. The wealthy aristocracy, the big landowning class, they started lobbying Parliament. And through a series of, frankly, often corrupt or coerced legislative maneuvers, the Enclosure Acts, they got the legal power to just abolish the traditional rights of the commoners.
Wow.
These acts let them survey the common land, declare it private property, and then start putting up fences, planting thick hedges, building these imposing stone walls. They literally enclosed the commons. They legally defined what had been shared for generations as exclusive private property.
I think the structural change here it's often underestimated. This wasn't just about property, it was a power shift.
A total power shift.
Suddenly, the self-sufficient community was entirely reliant on the whims of a powerful few.
And the systemic consequences for the peasantry were, they were catastrophic. They were just instantly stripped of their ability to sustain themselves. The entire foundation of their self-reliance, the ability to feed their livestock, gather fuel, supplement their diet, it vanished overnight.
They're locked out.
They were locked out of their own means of production, and not by violence at first. It was by bureaucratic paperwork and these new legally enforceable fences.
So what happens when you strip millions of people of their primary means of survival? They have to go somewhere.
They have to go where the money is. They had no choice but mass migration. They just poured into the burgeoning industrial cities. They became the wage laborers of the Industrial Revolution.
And that's the crucial transformation.
It's everything. They went from being community members with some degree of autonomy, masters of their own small domain, to being dependent cogs in a massive industrial machine that they did not own and they did not control.
Their identity just completely shifted.
Completely. From autonomous producers to dependents, solely reliant on a fixed, often meager wage, and tethered to the factory clock and the factory owner.
The isomorphism, that structural parallel, it's becoming crystal clear. The move from shared, decentralized resources to dependency and proprietary control. That is the exact journey we're about to map in the digital world.
Yes. The digital commons, the open shared internet, is now being fenced off. And the users, just like the peasants before them, are being forced into a mass migration toward the proprietary, enclosed digital factories.
Okay, so if the modern internet is this enclosed factory, what did the digital countryside look like before the fences went up? Weaver calls this phase one, the protocol era. We're talking, the 90s, early 2000s?
Roughly, yes. And this distinction is absolutely crucial for understanding what we lost. The early web was defined by protocols, not platforms.
Okay, break that down. Protocols.
Protocols are just open standards. They're agreed upon rules of engagement, technical specs for how different systems talk to each other. But crucially, no single company owned them. And no single company could just decide to change them.
So if the internet is a communication system, the protocols were like the public highway system.
That's a great analogy.
Anyone could use them, anyone could build a car to run on them, and the rules of the road were universal for everybody.
Absolutely. The entire foundation was interoperability. If you wanted to send messages, you used SMTP, the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol.
Email?
Email, yeah. It was clunky sometimes, but it was universally accessible. If you wanted to publish your thoughts, you used HTTP for your website. And this is so important, RSS, real simple syndication.
I feel like we need to have a moment of reverence for RSS here. It's like the ghost of the old web.
It truly is. RSS was the ultimate tool of self-reliance. You created content on your own domain, your own little piece of land, and anyone who wanted to subscribe could use an RSS reader app, again, an app they chose, and Control to pull that content directly to them.
So no middleman.
No middleman, no company deciding who saw your update, no algorithm throttling your feed or injecting ads. The exchange was direct.
And for discussions, for forums, you had things like NNTP or Usenet.
Right, the Network News Transfer Protocol. And look, these systems were messy. They were technical. They required genuine effort. If you remember trying to configure a mail server or set up your first website with FTP back in, say, 1998.
Oh, yeah, it was a project.
It was a project. You had to read manuals, maybe write some basic code.
It wasn't simple, and I think that friction is really important context for what came next.
It is, but from a technical standpoint, this structure made the early web what Weaver describes using the systems theory of Ludwig von Bertalanffy. He calls it a level 5 open system.
Okay, what does that mean for us?
It means it was a highly complex, decentralized system where all the components could interact freely without needing constant control or permission from some central authority.
Can you elaborate on why that interoperability was the key feature of the commons?
Because it meant connectivity was neutral. Let's take that email example again. A user on a huge corporate walled garden, like AOL was back then,
right,
could seamlessly communicate with a user on a tiny university mainframe. Or even with someone running their own server in their basement on their own domain. The CEO of AOL could not stop that email. There was no permission structure you had to go through to connect those two different systems. The infrastructure of communication itself was neutral ground.
So the system facilitated connection, but it didn't, mediate it?
Or capture it.
Or monetize the exchange.
Exactly. And this leads to the foundational insight of the protocol era. The value resided entirely at the edges of the network, in the hands of the users. The creativity, the innovation, the real content, it was all happening on individual websites, on mailing lists, on private forums, far away from the core open network infrastructure itself. The network just provided the pipes.
It sounds like a technological utopia compared to today, but you're right, it required technical literacy. It was inconvenient. So if the system was technically free and open, what was the tool that the new landowners used to start building those digital fences?
Well, the tool wasn't force. It wasn't legislation, not at first. The tool was seductive convenience.
Okay, so around 2005 to 2010, the whole dynamic just shifts profoundly.
Right.
We enter what Weaver calls the Great Aggregation. This is the moment the deal was struck.
It is.
And the peasantry, us, willingly, enthusiastically, just walked right into the walled gardens.
Yeah.
We traded our birthright for ease of use.
And that trade-off was incredibly effective because it solved a genuine pain point. It was the bargain of the decade, convenience for autonomy.
Right.
Just think back to the friction of phase one. Setting up a personal blog was a technical project. You needed to know FTP, manage hosts, maybe even wrestle with SQL databases.
And then Facebook arrived. Or I guess MySpace first, then Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn.
Yes, the new platforms. Setting up an account on Facebook was instant. No code required. It looked great, and it immediately connected you to everyone you already knew.
Meanwhile, configuring an RSS reader to pull content from 50 different websites was geeky and time-consuming.
Right. And scrolling a beautifully organized, instantly updated, personalized feed on your phone was addictive. It was frictionless.
You know, we often look back and sort of condemn the platforms, but we have to remember they offered a massive leap forward for billions of non-technical people.
They did.
They made global communication easy, and at first they were genuinely exciting.
They absolutely were, and they played the role of benevolent aggregators. They built these proprietary, beautiful, clean, well-managed walled gardens right on top of the messy, open protocols. They didn't have to build the roads. They just built these luxurious, perfectly managed resorts right off the highway.
And we all showed up, and we brought the only thing that made those resorts valuable: our content, our time, our photos, and critically, the map of our real-world connections.
We built the social graph for them inside their proprietary databases.
And for a while, it really felt like symbiosis. We got free instant connectivity and these beautiful tools. They got our data, which they used to, sell ads.
Yeah, that was the deal.
But where does this symbiosis break down? The critique suggests it stems from a fundamental flaw of closed systems.
That's right. Weaver links this right back to systems theory.
Yeah.
These platforms are structurally closed systems, and a core rule of thermodynamics when you apply it to systems is that unless you are constantly importing energy, any closed system tends to increase in entropy. It degrades, it becomes chaotic, noisy, inefficient.
So in the digital world, what is that chaos? What is that entropy?
It manifests as toxicity, as rage bait, as algorithmic manipulation, the increasing amount of just performative chaos. Initially, just extracting our data to sell targeted ads was enough energy to keep the system running. But once they hit global scale, once they became mandatory infrastructure, they needed to maximize their returns far beyond just simple advertising. And that necessity forced them to manipulate the system to maximize the one thing that imports enough energy, which is attention and interaction. And that one thing is chaos.
Wait, hold on. You're suggesting the noise, the outrage, the fighting on these platforms, that's not an accident.
Yeah.
That's the imported energy that keeps the system profitable.
Structurally, yes. Think about it. If civility and calm engagement, low entropy, means you check in once a day for 5 minutes, that doesn't feed the monetization engine.
Not enough clicks.
But outrage, fear, controversy, high entropy, that makes you refresh the feed every 30 seconds. The system needs that constant chaos to justify ever-increasing ad revenue. And that necessitates closing off the system to prevent users from finding ways to filter it out.
That makes the shift from openness to proprietary control seem entirely inevitable.
It was.
The seeds of the enclosure were planted the moment the platforms captured the social graph and turned it into this closed data set that needed to be constantly stimulated to extract maximum value.
And this transition from the open commons to this controlled chaos brings us to the one fascinating moment, a sort of glitch in the timeline, where the system actually tried to self-correct right before the final enclosure began.
This is one of my favorite points because everyone remembers Google Plus as this like failed ghost town.
Right.
But Weaver frames it as a fascinating glitch, a platform that tried to reintroduce structural complexity and high fidelity just as the rest of the web was racing toward simplification and maximum engagement.
It was an attempt at systemic self-correction, yes. Google Plus was structurally unique. It didn't just try to copy Facebook's flat friends model. It tried to organize the web using circles.
Okay, what was the big deal about circles?
Circles were an effort to map real-world social nuance onto the digital space. I mean, you post different things for your family than you do for your colleagues or your best friends or just acquaintances. Circles forced you to organize your audience intentionally. Now, this added friction, but it also increased the fidelity of the exchange. You actually had to think before you posted, which is the absolute antithesis of the instant, frictionless chaos that Facebook and Twitter were optimizing for.
And the most important structural choice they made was this attempt to solve the chaos problem, the entropy, by deploying a universal identity verification layer.
This is the core insight of the whole anomaly. Google integrated Google Plus comments directly into YouTube, and they required users to post under their verified real names. They were literally trying to clean up the dirtiest corner of the internet.
And for a brief, shining moment, what happened?
It worked. The entropy just dropped dramatically. The comment sections, which were historically the internet's cesspools, filled with the worst of anonymity, they began to clean themselves up.
Because there were consequences.
Hateful, chaotic, inflammatory rhetoric requires zero personal consequence to thrive. When you attach a verified identity, the entire incentive structure changes.
So we saw this sudden surge of what Weaver would call civil discourse, just because people couldn't hide anymore.
Absolutely. The signal-to-noise ratio shot up. People moderated their own behavior. For a minute there, it looked like an ideal, if maybe a little sterile public square.
But the result wasn't gratitude from the users.
Yeah.
It was a visceral, powerful revolt. I remember the pushback was immense. It felt almost existential.
It was. Users who had been conditioned by Phase 2 to value anonymity and frictionless consumption, they felt violated. They demanded the right to operate without consequence. They demanded the right to consume and criticize without their true identity being attached to the action. And this revolt just manifested as a mass migration away from Google, plus coordinated outrage campaigns. It was a profound cultural resistance to verification.
But it wasn't just trolls who revolted, though, was it? It was also people who genuinely valued their privacy, or who felt that being forced to use a real name restricted their freedom of expression.
And that is the essential complexity, of course. While verification lowers systemic entropy, the chaos, the toxicity, it absolutely increases personal friction, and it sacrifices that perceived right to full anonymity.
And we chose anonymity.
Users collectively prioritized that right to low friction and high anonymity over the benefits of a cleaned-up digital commons. They voted with their absence.
And Google, which of course needs massive user engagement to feed its advertising machine, they capitulated. They removed the mandatory verified identity requirement.
And once that core value proposition, the verified civil discourse, was gone, the platform lost its unique selling point. The trolls came back, and Google Plus quickly failed. Weaver argues this was the critical bifurcation point.
The fork in the road.
We collectively rejected the structure that lowers entropy, which is verified identity, in favor of the structure that maximizes engagement, which is anonymity and low friction.
We chose chaos because chaos was comfortable. And for the platforms, it was profitable.
And that choice made the final descent into what Weaver calls the dark forest. This chaotic, unnavigable, rage-fueled mainstream web, absolutely inevitable. The platforms learned their lesson. User autonomy and civility are secondary to engagement and ad revenue. So once the social graph was captured and the user preference for chaos was confirmed, the enclosure process could be finalized.
So we reach phase 3, the enclosure. Weaver pinpoints this time frame to right around 2023.
Right.
The platforms, having achieved this critical mass, they stopped acting like benevolent aggregators providing a free service.
Right.
And they started acting like monopoly landlords. They achieved full control And then they changed all the rules.
And this is where that structural isomorphism becomes truly chilling. Weaver connects this stage to a very specific metaphor from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, Directive 10-289.
Okay, this is a big literary reference. We need to be really clear here and just focus on the structural mechanics of the directive itself, not the politics of the novel.
Of course.
So what exactly was Directive 10-289?
In the novel, it's this desperate bureaucratic decree from a failing government. It's designed to just freeze the economy. Directive 10-289 explicitly forbade three things: creating any new products, any new innovation, or anyone quitting their job.
So pure stagnation.
Pure stagnation. The goal was to secure the bureaucrats' existing power by just stopping the motor of the world.
And Weaver's argument is that the platform's behavior around 2023 structurally mirrors this exact thing, stopping the digital motor of the world to maximize their own control and revenue.
Exactly.
They aren't inventing new things anymore. They're banning our ability to invent.
That's it. They didn't pass literal laws, but they restricted the means of building on top of their platforms. And this enclosure happened across three major interconnected pillars.
Okay, let's start with pillar number 1, which directly echoes that forbidding new inventions part of the directive, the death of innovation through API shutdowns.
This was a decisive, coordinated move. Platforms like Twitter, now X and Reddit, they aggressively shut down their application programming interfaces, their APIs.
And the API is basically the digital pipe that lets outside developers make new tools for the platform.
Right. It allows third-party entrepreneurs to access the platform's data and build new things.
So shutting down those pipes, what did that kill?
It killed the entire thriving third-party ecosystem. I mean, we have to remember specific examples here. Power users loved apps like Tweetbot for Twitter or Apollo for Reddit.
Right, they were often way better than the official apps.
They were. They offered better filtering, better curation, customization, and critically, they usually gave you an ad-free or privacy-conscious way to access the social graph. They were the digital tools of the self-reliant user.
They let the user innovate their own consumption experience.
Yeah.
You could tailor your digital environment to your needs, not the platform's needs.
Precisely. And by shutting down the APIs, the platform effectively froze the user experience to the single proprietary version, the version that is meticulously optimized to serve the maximum number of ads, maximize algorithmic engagement, and capture every possible data point no matter what the user actually wants.
That doesn't sound like innovation. It sounds like monopoly protection.
It is. It's a structural defense of their position as a rentier. If you can't build better tools, you are forced to use the tools designed to extract maximum value from you.
Which brings us right to pillar number 2, pay to play, or the rentier state. This is the ultimate transformation from a community to a landlord-tenant relationship.
The word rentier is key here. A rentier economy is one where income comes purely from owning assets, in this case the social graph and the infrastructure, not from actually producing new goods or services. The platforms are now charging us rent for access to the asset that we built for them.
And how does this actually manifest?
Well, platforms like LinkedIn and X introduced these mandatory, verified, or premium tiers. So users spend years organically building a network. They invest their time posting quality content, generating reach based on genuine interest.
Merit.
And then the platforms just systematically throttle that organic reach. They make the whole experience opaque and frustrating.
And the unspoken message is pretty clear. That network you spend 5 years building, we own the pipes now. And if you want your own content to reach those people, you have to pay us a recurring tax.
It's a literal payment for the privilege of working the land you previously worked for free. It's a form of taxation without representation or any real new service. It transforms the user base from a community of contributors into a source of fixed, predictable, recurring revenue. You are now paying rent just to talk to the people you invited into the neighborhood.
That is the definition of a digital serf.
Tethered to the system, required to pay the landlord for the privilege of accessing your own connections.
And pillar number 3, the one that really connects this enclosure to the future, is data fencing.
This is the ultimate harvest. The accumulated creative labor of millions upon millions of users, all the posts, the photos, the discussions, the jokes, the insights, the history, all of it is now being actively fenced off. And this fencing is happening specifically because of the explosive rise of generative AI.
Okay, so let's go back to the peasant metaphor. We are the community who spent generations grazing the land, and the result of our labor is wool.
And now the platform landlord is harvesting all that wool or accumulated data and selling it wholesale to the new industrial AI factories to train their large language models. They are monetizing the social graph, not just by showing ads to us, but by selling the accumulated knowledge and creative labor of us to the highest bidder, usually without any explicit consent or compensation.
So the fence isn't just stopping us from leaving the enclosure. It's keeping our intellectual property in so it can be mined, quantified, and automated by AI.
That's the key. The enclosure secures the data assets just in time for the explosion of the AI industry, positioning the platform owners as the exclusive suppliers of the raw material needed to train the next generation of automation.
So we've established the digital factory is fully enclosed, and we are the dependent, paying laborers inside. But Weaver introduces this profound, almost hopeful twist that shifts the entire dynamic of escape. He calls it the human-robot isomorphism.
Yes, we have to fundamentally re-examine the historical industrial revolution through this lens. When those peasants were forced into the cities after the first enclosure, they became wage laborers. But structurally, what they were doing, they were acting as crude approximations of future automation. They were placeholders.
Explain that, the human robot as a placeholder.
Well, industry back then lacked the technology, the intricate mechanics, the sensors, the programming to automate its complex processes. So the system forced autonomous, skilled humans, people who used to manage complex farms or were skilled artisans, to function as robots.
Right.
They were required to perform a single repetitive function with 100% compliance for long, standardized shifts. Their complex human creativity was suppressed, forced to fit the rudimentary requirements of the industrial machine.
So they were cogs, not because humanity is naturally cog-like, but because the technology of the day was too primitive to build the actual gears.
Yes.
The human was the cheat-compliant placeholder for the automation that just hadn't been invented yet.
That is the isomorphism. Now, fast forward to 2025, and we are witnessing the inverse isomorphism with the rise of generative AI and robotics. The digital factory, the content mills, the endless SEO spam, the algorithmic engagement cycles, it no longer requires the human placeholder.
The robot has finally arrived.
Yeah.
Globally. Instantaneously.
AI is here to perform that single, repetitive, compliant function of generating content, responding to algorithms, and driving engagement metrics. Think of the millions of hours spent by humans optimizing headlines, writing endless listicles, generating predictable content loops designed purely to feed the platform algorithm.
Those were the human as robot jobs.
Those were the jobs. The wage earners of the information economy aren't just losing jobs, they are losing the jobs they were fundamentally always meant to shed.
This is a radical reframing of the current anxiety around AI. I mean, if the platform incentivized content generation designed for the algorithm, and the AI is now better at generating algorithmic content than the human is,
then the machine is just finally taking the job it was created for.
the profound conclusion Weaver offers is this. The AI is here to be the robot, so the human can stop being one. The economic necessity that drove us into these digital cities, the need to generate compliant content to feed the machine and earn attention, is dissolving.
It's dissolving.
And that presents a radical opportunity for liberation. If the value extraction system is now completely self-sufficient and automated, if the factory no longer needs our compliant labor, we are structurally free to leave the factory floor, to abandon the performance of the digital serf.
The factory has automated and the humans are redundant. We are not just being kicked out, we are being freed from a necessary but ultimately dehumanizing structural requirement.
So where do the free humans go? If the factory is automated and the digital cities are now just generating noise and selling our aggregated data, we have to find an alternative.
If the factory is automated and enclosed, humans must revert to the countryside, a hidden alternative space defined by low-entropy, high-trust exchange.
And Weaver leverages another concept from Atlas Shrugged here, Galt's Gulch. And again, let's stick strictly to the structural metaphor, not the politics. What does Galt's Gulch represent in the digital sphere?
In the novel, Galt's Gulch was this hidden, technologically advanced valley where the most productive and rational people retreated from a suffocating, corrupt society. They built a new society based entirely on earned value, on meritocracy, and voluntary exchange. It was a space based on competence and reason, not on coerced dependency or bureaucratic control.
So it's an economy of value for value, not an economy of ad-driven attention.
Exactly. And today, the dark forest, a term that's been popularized to describe the rise of private, closed digital spaces, is the distributed Galt's Gulch. It's not a retreat from the world itself, but a retreat from the entropy of the factory.
The chaos.
The constant chaos, the mandatory rage bait, the algorithmic noise, and the pressure to perform for maximum engagement.
So this new commons isn't a public square visible to everyone like the old web was. It's intentionally exclusive, curated, maybe a little bit hidden.
The new commons are defined by trust, subscription, and friction. They are signal group chats, they are small, private Discord servers, curated Substack newsletters, closed forums. Access isn't determined by a platform's algorithm deciding what maximizes profit. Access is determined by trust or by a direct financial exchange for value.
But this sounds inherently elitist, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if the open web was available to everyone, and now the valuable low-entropy spaces require a fee or an invitation, isn't this just recreating digital stratification?
And that is the essential challenge of the dark forest. The openness of the protocol era came with chaos. The convenience of the platform era came with enclosure and dependency. The dark forest offers value purity, but it demands commitment, either in money or in trust, to gain entry.
But the value proposition is different.
Completely. Inside the dark forest, the algorithm does not exist. There is no incentive for rage bait or chaos. The exchange is pure. Insight for insight, specific value for specific value.
The new economy is built on attention paid directly, not attention hijacked by a manipulative algorithm.
Correct. It develops a new economy of attention divorced from the centralized, ad-driven mechanism of the enclosed platforms. And this requires an active strategy of resistance. Weaver calls this guerrilla gardening.
I love that term. It suggests these small, deliberate acts of cultivation in an otherwise industrialized landscape. So who is responsible for this?
The bridge generation, those of us who remember the protocols, who understand how the old open web actually worked, we must actively resist the status of digital serfs. We have to reclaim small patches of the open web and cultivate them.
Okay, so let's get practical. What are the actionable, non-convenient steps for the listener, for the guerrilla gardener who wants to escape the factory floor?
The actions are simple, but they violate that cardinal rule of phase 2. They require friction and commitment.
Step 1.
Start a personal website and own your domain. You must control the digital address where your content lives. You are not building on leased land. This is the digital equivalent of buying your own small plot of land outside the fences. If you publish content, publish it here first, not inside the enclosure.
Step 2.
Use email newsletters actively for communication. Email relies on an open protocol, SMTP. No single platform owns the pipes, which means no CEO can decide tomorrow that only 5% of your subscribers will get your message unless you pay a fee. It bypasses the algorithmic throttling mechanism entirely.
It's a direct connection.
A direct, unmediated connection. And step 3, prioritize direct connection and high-trust exchanges over algorithmic reach. Actively move your key relationships out of the walled gardens and into those dark forest channels. Signal, simple email, private forums where you know the identity and the intent of your audience. Resist the urge to perform for the algorithm's vast but chaotic audience. Prioritize depth over scale.
But at the end of the day, doesn't the platform still own the hardware? Don't they ultimately own the ability to shut off the internet connection?
They own the physical assets, yes. The servers, the pipes. But the crucial, unenclosable variable is the relationship. The platforms may own the infrastructure, but they do not own the human connection, the trust built over years, or the shared insights. The fences are only effective as long as we are unwilling to walk outside the walls to find each other and establish these new, higher friction, higher trust spaces.
So if we actively cultivate those relationships off-platform, the enclosure just becomes this empty, automated factory, successfully feeding itself with its own algorithmic content, but it's devoid of the meaningful human exchange that the free humans have taken somewhere else.
We are finally free to stop being the robots.
Okay, so to briefly recap Weaver's compelling map,
Right.
we moved from the decentralized protocols, the commons, that just facilitated exchange,
Right.
through the tempting trade-off of the convenient platforms, the walled gardens. And we finally arrived at this monopolistic enclosure, the rentier state, which is characterized by things like API shutdowns and pay-to-play schemes designed to extract rent from relationships that we built.
But the unique element of this second enclosure is the arrival of AI, which automates that human as robot labor. And this is the unexpected gift of structural liberation. The economic necessity to perform compliant labor for the algorithm has just vanished, which offers us the opportunity to finally leave the digital factory and retreat to the high-trust spaces of the distributed Galt's Gulch.
In this transition, it presents a clear but difficult challenge. We have the blueprints for the next commons in the form of the dark forest. But maintaining those meaningful relationships outside the convenience of the walled gardens requires, a deliberate, often inconvenient action that runs completely counter to our modern digital conditioning.
Right.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought. If the digital factory no longer requires your compliant labor, what are you doing to cultivate your own digital garden outside the walls? Are you continuing to pay the rent just to talk to your friends? Or are you actively planting the seeds of connection on land that you own?
And we should note, as Weaver himself did in his writing, that this entire analysis was developed in conversation with an AI model, Google Gemini 3.0, which perfectly reinforces the modern, complex context of human interaction and automation.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the blueprint of the second enclosure. We hope this knowledge serves as a critical map for navigating the next phase of the digital world.